Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, I think I can start. So welcome again. So this is the research ethics and the best practices, one of the very, very, very important component. Even if you, for example, did not write good paper, but you should never have bad ethics. I'm not saying don't write good paper. Even if you miss something, you can improve them. But if you have bad ethics, that means your work will not be credible, and it's you'll have more consequences than just getting rejection. And that's why you need to understand the research ethics. It's the core of any scientific research. Uh, so we'll just look into what ethics is, why it's important in research, and what it means for the ethical publication and best practices. And we look some of the best practices. It's not the exhaustive material. You may need to look other things, but it will provide you a clear pathway that you can follow through. Okay, so what's ethics? I just look into this dictionary, and then it gives me several meaning. Uh, but the one that I'm more interested here and that applies to us is the principle of conduct governing an individual or group. That's what we are more focused on here. It's a principle of conduct. For in terms of research, we want everyone to be ethical, meaning they do things in a right way. They do not fabricate things. So ethics in research, so you may say, how did it start? It started by the abuse practiced by Nazi Germans in the concentration camp and syphilis studies of American prisoners in US. What they did was not good. They used humans as a test subjects without considering them as a humans. Uh, and that led to the ethics, rise of the ethics and all those ethical standards. Ethics is not same as morals. Morals is more related to one's own behavior, but or the personal principle. Ethics is more of code of conduct that you need to follow. If you are in a particular culture, society, or groups of profession, for example, people in the medicine follow medical code of ethics. They can't say I will not follow that. If they say I will not follow that, they would have to leave their profession. So ethics has that kind of consequences if you don't follow. Why is ethics important in research? Uh, that's the question that you should be asking yourself. Ethics help to ensure the credibility and trust in the research. So when you are ethical, that means your research is credible and it can be trusted. So why should and it also promotes transparency and reproducibility of research. It upholds the rights and welfare of the participants. Remember, in the case of the Nazi concentration camp, where they were treating people like not like humans and doing all kinds of harms. They were not like concerned with the harms of about the experiments that they were doing. In the case of US, like the case of Nazis and syphilis study, and ethics is also important to prevent the misconduct in the context of research like plagiarism, data fabrication, and falsification, which have impact, and to avoid the legal consequences of it, right? Before answering like what happens if we don't follow ethics in research, you should be asking question is, the bigger picture, why is it important in research? For example, we saw different kinds of research. One was translational research, where you translate your findings uh, into developing all kinds of solutions or drugs that can help improve human health. Now, imagine you falsified result, you fabricated the result, and you said, okay, my study shows that if you do this, it will help you cure X disease. Now imagine the consequences it will have on people just because you fabricated the result, the amount of harm it will bring to the humans or the community. To avoid that kind of thing, you need to have ethics. You need to maintain ethics. Okay, that's about falsification. But then what happens if you don't follow ethics in research, right? Your paper will get retracted. That means if it's published, it's not there all time. If you have falsified, if you have violated ethics, it will be pulled down. It will be retracted. So publisher said this research has been retracted. Here you can see why they have, because they raised concern on the figure, like on their analysis component. That's not making sense. It looks like there's some fabrication kind of thing. And then here, they have violated substance of related to adherence of to Elsevier publication policies. You see the guidelines different journals provide. So they have violated that norms. That's why this paper is being withdrawn. And in the case of medical research, they find some irregularities in randomization procedure. So retraction, sometimes even author do themselves if they find error that you should do. If you notice error in your published research, you should retract. And then they also have some corrected version of the paper. You can always do that. There will always be information how the retraction was done. Here, in this case, it's initiated by author. Uh, Okay, it's by editor again. Sometimes author also do, but in that case, they will clearly highlight that. So even if you disregard the consequences of ethics on human, uh, what you should see is if you have falsified, if you have violated ethical principles of ethical guidelines, your paper will also be withdrawn. So you should follow ethics, not just because your paper will be withdrawn, but also the negative consequences it can bring to the community. Now, ethical publishing. There are different components that you need to follow. First, we want to look into the plagiarism, what it means. Again, I was looking into the Cambridge Dictionary to see what plagiarism is, according to it. Says it's a process or practice of using another person works, ideas, and pretending to claim it as your own. So if you say, for example, if you are in a team discussion, if you discuss something and one of your friends says, brought up some good ideas, and then later you go on and saying, okay, this is my idea, that's wrong, that's unethical, and that's also a plagiarism. And there are different forms of plagiarism. One is verbatim plagiarism. You copy exact word uh, without editing, and then you don't give credit to those original source. The other one is the mosaic plagiarism. So mixing, you take someone else's idea, you add little bit of your own wording, and then say it's your idea. That's also plagiarism. Paraphrasing, writing part of the rephrasing and rephrasing any part of the manuscript taken from some other sources and claiming it to be your own without citing the source. That's also a form of plagiarism. And the self-plagiarism is, for example, duplicate publication or copying things from your own publication without citing is also plagiarism. For example, if I have published, I don't know, 3 papers and I want to use first 2 papers in my third paper, I need to cite those paper as a source. I cannot just use things just because I'm the author in those publications. The other form is the cyber plagiarism, copying or downloading articles in part or whole without proper attribution, image plagiarism using images and video without proper attribution or permission. Now, those are the different kinds of are the forms of plagiarism. Detecting plagiarism. There are plagiarism checker tools. In general, detecting plagiarism is hard. Not all kinds of plagiarism. For example, if you have taken other ideas, it's hard for this tool to detect, right? Um, those kinds of plagiarism. But if you have copied some text from some other sources, it's easy to detect. If you have used some AI generated text, it's easy to detect. The important message here, it's hard to detect doesn't mean you can and you should plagiarize. It's unethical. You should have some ethical uh, uh, ethics on your own, because imagine if someone discovered you being unethical, on one particular research, all your credibility will be lost, even on those papers that you have done ethically. So that's why you should be ethical. You should maintain the ethics. How to avoid plagiarism? It's simple. Make a proper attribution, cite the required sources. In case of copying the exact text, if you want to copy the exact text and use, for example, like quote, you can mark in the quotation. That means that indicates that that's not your thing. You have used from some sources. Also include the reference. Give acknowledgement, use footnotes, and obtain permission where necessary. This permission is especially when you want to use image from other publication that's not your own. You may need to apply for copyright, obtain copyright permission. That's about the plagiarism. And the other important aspects of ethical publishing is authorship ethics. Research, when you publish a research paper, it gives you recognition, and it's nice that nice to have recognition, and everyone would like to have recognition. But recognition doesn't come for free. You have to work for it. You have to earn it. And that's where the authorship ethics comes into play. ICMJE, International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, have outlined authorship criteria, which is highly regarded, and it defines the 4 criteria for one to be author. They have to make substantial contribution in research. When I say in research, it doesn't mean just implementing things. It can be in terms of conceptualization, hypothesis generation, formulating your idea, interpretation of your result, those kinds of things, or have to be also have to work on drafting documents, reviewing all those texts that you have put or your co-authors have put, and are responsible for final approval and are accountable for whatever things that's been put there. So when your name goes on to any of those papers, you cannot say at later point of time if for example, if the paper plagiarized, you cannot say I did not do that. You are responsible for that because you are author of that paper. So it's also your responsibility to ensure that those things are not happening when you are writing paper. Why authorship matters? As I was saying before, it gives recognition, promotion, graduation, scholarship, and also has social implications, like positive social implications. There are different types of authors. First author, the one making the significant contribution. And last authors, often, but not always, are the supervisor of senior researchers who supervise you in the research. And there are co-authors that are the ones they contributed to research. Corresponding author uh, is a person who interacts with journal, submits the manuscript. Okay, the order of the author. Usually, first author, when you see, you say, okay, they are, he's or she is the one who has made the significant contribution. But that's not the always case. In some journal, they have authors in the alphabetical order, but when they have alphabetical ordering, they clearly state that the authors are in the alphabetical order. If two or more authors have made equal contribution, you can mark them, say they have this author have made equal contribution. You should never claim that you made more contribution if you did not. And if you have disputes, there's also guidelines by COPE, Community of Publication Ethics, which you can find in reference. You should follow that guidelines on how to deal with disputes. And disputes may arise from all kinds of things, like uh, someone wants to be first author and someone wants to be second author. How do you dispute? So it's always recommended you decide the authorship, the order of the authorship. Also, it's also based on contribution. So you should discuss about those things when you start to work on the research. Right. Okay. It's the okay human, and it's okay. There's something. This should not be authorship ethics. So the other important consideration for ethics is ethics on human and animal subjects. When your research involves humans or animals, you need to consider more things because it may cause harm. And we see the case of Nazi or US syphilis study where they were conducting experiment in humans. Now people are certain testing things on animal subjects, but there are certain guidelines we need to follow. Why are we doing this? For example, not to violate, for example, human privacy, human rights, or cause harm to humans or animals. There are various ethical guidelines that exist at the government level, institutional level, and even in the publisher level. You need to make sure you adhere to all those standards that's applicable to your research. And if you, this is very, very important. You should be compliant. You cannot just go out there uh, and start experimenting on animals or humans. Uh, uh, for example, if that was the case, people in medicine could go and just start uh, cutting like people just to do all kinds of experiment, right? Those kinds of things should not be done. And those kinds of things people were doing during in the Nazi concentration camp. For any research that involves the human participants or animal, you should have your research plan reviewed by the institutional review board. I don't know if almost all of the university will have this institutional review board. You should say, okay, they have the guidelines how you should submit all those research plan. You need to clearly state what you want to do, how you want to do, and then they will review it and give you approval. If they don't give you approval, you cannot do that research. That means that your research outcome will have a negative impact on people. It can harm people. People can misuse it. And you should not do that research. Or if you do, you may do in the closed scenario. They will give. In the case of CAIR-Nepal, we don't have it one, but I'm working on drafting this institutional review board documentation process so that every people working in CAIR-Nepal can follow it. So here's some of the research ethics and guidelines from NIS. It's National Institute of Health in US. There are more. You need to check based on country where you are, also the publication where you are publishing. Uh, Almost all of them most likely have standard guidelines, but some things are also country specific because those ethics should also reflect the cultures and the geographic reasons. Right. We have seen plagiarism. We have seen also the humans and animal subjects and also the authorship guidelines. Now let's look into the best practices, right? What are the best practices on these things? Always make proper attribution. This helps you avoid plagiarism. Cite source only. Uh, okay, that doesn't mean you can cite every other sources. It needs to be correct source, not the random one. Reduce the self-citation. You can cite your paper, but you should only do when it is strictly necessary. Just because you want to include the citation count, you should not include cite your paper to increase the citation. Always try to cite the original source and avoid the excessive secondary sources. Sometimes it's not possible to find the original source. In that case, you can cite the secondary source. For example, if paper B is citing paper A, that's the original source, and they both discuss the same some common aspect, right? And then if you want to cite that thing, you should cite paper A because it's the original source. But if it's not available, then you can cite paper B uh, instead of paper A. But always try to cite the original source and ensure the accuracy and consistent formatting style, because this also will provide clear information on the source where you have where that publication was published and venue and all kinds of things. I avoid misspelled author names, wrong publication dates, venues, DOI, all those things about the reference. You can use the reference management tools like Zerto or Mendeley, to help managing your references. Here's an example of a good and bad referencing. Here, it clearly provides all the author names, title of the paper, the journals it was published, volume, page number, all the details basically, and the DOI. Why is this important? Because if someone wants to go into that source and look for that information, they can verify that. And here it's bad because it's missing DOI and the publication venue. Where was it published? You don't know. Is it really a research paper published in some publication, or it just someone published a blog on this thing? Yeah, you should always try to include DOI wherever possible, because and the other thing is that sometimes people just cite because they need to without reading the paper. You should not do that. Okay, you should not cite the common knowledge. For example, if you say sunrise in the east in the paper, it's a general knowledge. It's widely a non-fact. You should not cite that. But if it's not common knowledge, you should cite. Avoid plagiarism by omission, because failing to cite sources, because sometimes uh, it can happen that in an unintentional manner you may plagiarize, right? That can happen sometimes, but you should try to avoid it. Failing to cite source even when like paraphrasing or summarizing the information. And then authorship requires significant contribution. Just because someone is your friend or provide you some money, funding, you should not include them as authors. Every conference, journals, and publishers have their own guidelines. Make sure you check their guidelines and write your paper accordingly. Never, I would say never falsify or fabricate your data result just because you want to have good result and publish. Instead of falsifying and fabricating result or data, publish the negative result, if any, you had. Because negative result is also a good result, I would say. Why? Because it helps to other researchers to not do the same, not follow the same methodology or approach, because that may give the negative result, or it may uh, show the other side of the research that other people had not thought about. And then whenever your research involves humans or animals, always try to, or not try to, you should always follow the ethical guidelines that has been laid out by the ethical committee of your institution or the government before initiating any research. It's not that you do your research part and then you say, I follow these guidelines. No, that's not following the guidelines. First, you need to go through the guidelines, see if your uh, uh, research should be done or if it causes harm, and then you should proceed on to doing research. Yeah, that's for the ethics part. I think we can have a discussion now, and then we'll move on to hands-on session.